Hello, Alyssa. Welcome.
Hey guys, and thank you for having me.
No problem. I was jonesing to have you on here. Uh, I think I wanted you last year or the year before, and I don't know what happened, or I think you were busy, and I don't know what happened. But glad you're here
Q1
now.
tends to be a little bit of a busy time for me. I do a lot of preparation for the likes of GaryCon and such. And I do remember a couple of years ago, I was preparing for the first GaryCon that actually got cancelled because of COVID. So I was just doing a lot of ramp up and time involvement in that. But regardless, I'm super pumped to be here today.
That's great. So I'm on your first slide here, but I want to talk to you a little bit about your impetus for uh, being involved with the hobby itself. So what was that like going into the hobby, and how did you get inspired to do all this?
Completely unlike everyone else that just went before me, it was an accident. And I mean that. It was a complete accident. So I might be your oldest guest today. I don't know. I was gaming back in the 80s, and back then, particularly if you can't buy scenarios from other people, or there weren't many to have, or if you're just creating your own, you've got to do your own maps, right? So I I had to back in the day just draw my own maps for my own games. And fast forward to I don't know the 2000s, mid 2000s, something like that. I'm with some trepidation joining Facebook, and I'm joining sort of various groups, kind of getting into the groove. And someone on a D&D style group posted a map of theirs, and I was like, wow, okay, people share their maps and stuff. That's kind of cool. Maybe I can do the same. And I did. I shared a city map that I had drawn about 20, 30 years before. And everyone fell out of their seats. And it was not a reaction I was expecting, like at all. And I was like, holy cow. Okay, well, here's another one. And the people were just loving what they were seeing. So, people were like, well, have you got any more? I was like, yeah, I don't know, about 70 of them. And you can imagine, like, people were just like, holy cow, okay. And so I just started sharing. And then there was that little, well, will you draw one for me? And I was like, yeah, I guess I will. And so I started just drawing maps for other people. And then one day, um, Cobalt Press popped up and said, will you draw one for us? And that was my first true professional map that I ended up drawing, and it was an accident, and it snowballed from there. I literally had Monty Cook come to me and say, "Will you draw me a map?" And I was like, "What the hell is happening with my life right now?" So honestly, I fell into it.
That's a cool story. So what tools are you using? Like everything, or do you just have a
Am I
certain?
on my own? Is everyone on mute?
No,
Tough
I got
crowd.
it. What tools are you using for the? Sorry about that. What tools are you using for most of your work, other than the sketch?
I'm so different than a lot of the other guests here. In some way. So, crowd, get yourself braced, okay? I started with ink on paper. Nowadays, just get yourself a drawing tablet. It's basically the same thing. I mean, I was literally biro on paper for a while, and then I went out and got myself some nice art pens. Zero 0.5 or 0.3, or it ends up being 0.2, millimeters. It just nice ink pens on paper is where I started. And I did 20, 30 years of that. That is my roots, okay? And then I transitioned when actually Cobalt Press asked me to draw a map for them. I was like, okay, I do all of my stuff ink on paper, but they're going to want a colored piece, and I'm not going to be able to color this thing appropriately if I do this thing ink on paper. I'm going to need to get myself some proper hardware. So I invested in a Wacom tablet. It's basically a monitor that lies flat, and you can draw on it. I play games on it, and then I lie it flat and I draw on it. And then I use Photoshop. And I know there's been a crowd out there today hating on Photoshop. I get it. It's just a tool that I am used to. There are plenty of free options. I just, I subscribe to the Adobe Suite, and so I personally, I have InDesign, I have Illustrator, I have Photoshop, and I use them for different purposes. And Photoshop is my chosen medium, but I use it just like I'm drawing ink on paper in all truth. And you could totally use GIMP or any other platform and basically do exactly what I'm doing.
So I can see that you've done commission work with Kobold Press, but what is it like when you're creating stuff for yourself? Like, what's that creative process like, or even for plan stuff? Like, are you just sketching and building from there, or are you see something and just grab it, or I mean, what's your process like?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I'm best known for my city maps. And for that, I tend to I will just walk you through the process that I used to use and I still use today. Grab the equivalent of a pencil, something that's easily erasable. If you're going to use an electronic program, listen to me, an electronic program. I sound like I'm 82, but if you're going to use one of those drawing tablets that kids use today, just set up a separate layer that's easily erased, and you're going to sketch out something. And I would very, very broadly, with no level of detail, just slash out some outline of what I want the city shape to be. Just it could be the walls, it could be the general where the most density of the buildings at the edge are going to be, and I would just slash it out. I would also draw in like my coastlines, my rivers, and I play with shapes. I play with the shapes of the terrain. I play with the shapes of the major geographical features, like big, huge ovals for where my hills are going to be, for example. And I kind of use that as a basis, and I kind of sit back and I go, okay, so how would the city form around this? And then I kind of come in with another pencil and I start to kind of just a little, still very rough, but kind of just sort of sketching. Oh, I think there would be buildings here. I think there would be buildings here. This is where the edge of the city would be. This is where maybe it started. Um, where are my main POIs going to be? Maybe there's going to be a temple district over here. Maybe this is where my rich district is going to be. This is where my harbors are going to be. I very, very, very loosely draw it in. By the way, if you looked at my loose drawn so it's almost pencil inspiration for as I'm crafting the foundations of a city. They are looser than you would think. I mean, they are just lines, circles, squares. You mention it. And then once I've got that in, then I actually draw in my coastline or my river edge or my lake edge. I'll start to draw in my walls, and I almost have an outside in. So it's like I kind of go big first. Like if you're really above the city, what is the main thing you see? The shape. Is that shape formed by walls? Is that shape formed by the lake edge? Is it formed by the river edge? I draw those in first, and then I kind of come in a little bit, and then I'll start to draw in my major districts. I'll hit my POIs first, my palace. I'll hit my temples and that type of thing, because those are the things that the eye is drawn to. So if you're a bird kind of falling down towards a city, that's kind of the order I'm taking it. Then I start drawing in neighborhoods. I start drawing in blocks of buildings around my main POIs and such. And as I'm drawing those, and I've released videos on this process, as I'm drawing those, my streets and my alleyways and my courtyards start to form, and I basically just fill in the space. I mean, it sounds a little bit like, that meme where you draw the owl. How to draw an owl? Draw the outside ovals, then draw the rest of it. It sounds a little bit like that, but that's kind of my process. I draw the outline shapes, I get my main POIs in there, and then I just pour in the detail.
That's quite a process, but I can visualize it as you were going through that. I kind of pictured in my mind, I'm staring at these maps here from your castle guides. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why I asked to share the Castle Keeper's Guide maps is because really it shows a few different approaches and scales, right? I mean, in the bottom left corner, you've got the metropolis, while almost most of the middle row are our towns and fortified towns and a city. Um, what this particular commission was orientated around, though, was about 12 maps, something like that, where it goes from a thorp to a hamlet to a village, and that's the top left, top middle, and top right. And so I basically, this was fun because I did this whole thing on stream, and I drew the top left thorp first, and look up what is a thorp, look up like how many people actually live there. It's just a few buildings. It's probably just an extended family. Draw that in. Where would a thorp be located? Well, they're probably near a water source, So I started thinking about things like that. And then the next one, which is actually a hamlet, that's kind of an extension of it. And I drew it as an extension of it. So my thorp is actually in the hamlet as you kind of zoom out a little bit. And so it kind of iterated across. And then by the time we get to the village in the top right, actually the thorp and the hamlet are in it. I've kind of almost like I've shown the evolution of this particular settlement. And that, by the way, then continues on into the town. It continues on into the city. It's all part of the same map. So that was amazing fun to draw from that perspective.
I can see the amount of dedication and work and I pulled in one of your sketches for the tower, which I can see that now. Your style is pretty unique. I don't think it looks like anybody else's. I mean, there's some artists that I've looked at, like outside of this venue, that you can kind of tell they kind of rob and steal, and everyone kind of does that a little bit to some extent. But you definitely have some character, and I'm starting to recognize your maps now. So when I look at a product, I go, "Oh, this might be Alyssa's," and damn sure it is. Like I didn't know you before, like very well. I didn't know your work, but now that you've been out for a couple years at least, I can tell like what work you've done. And I had no clue that you had done this GaryCon map here for the virtual event. What was that? GaryCon.
This
See.
one was GaryCon 12, I
Yeah,
think. We're coming up to GaryCon 14. I'm curious, though, before we move on, because I know how I would describe my own style. How would
sure.
you describe my style?
I would say that it almost looks like, to be honest, when you were talking about your process and describing this, it was almost like you were in World War II and you dropped out of an airplane and you fell over the streets of London, or you walked on these streets yourself. So I looked at it as like adventurous, like you want to tackle this thing from different angles, but you also want to cover all the different bases. So I would say an adventurer is kind of what I'm getting from your style. It's more adventurous, and it has characteristics that are unique because not everyone gets those perspectives from one particular project. So you don't normally get all those views. So my interpretation of your work is adventurous. Like that's what I would call it. Um, Not so much like, oh, you're melodramatic, or you're dark, or I think adventurous is the word I'm looking for. But it
I
looks
think that's insightful. I think that's insightful because one of the, I mean, there's a way I would describe myself, which I'll tell you in a moment. But I have been on plenty of streams now where I'm in the mode. I'm almost like a Bob Ross, right? I'm drawing this thing, I'm describing what I'm seeing, and I find myself saying, imagine that you're walking along the street and you see this building, you see this archway, and I find myself, my eyes close and I'm there. And that's kind of how I approach a lot of these maps. Like I'm there and I want to draw what I'm seeing. I want to give you the boots on the ground perspective. But I'm not talking battle map style. I'm talking about, I'm handing you a city map, I'm handing you a village or whatever it is. And I want the players, I want the person holding that map immediately to go, "Ooh, what's this?" I want them to be now pulled into the map. And I want the players to point to things and go, "What's this?" And I also want the GM, because I've been on both sides of the table, to go, "I don't know, let's find out." And I like adding things to my maps, all of my maps that have story. that have that boots on the ground feel. When I was drawing what's on the left side here of the slide, every single piece of this I drew with audience participation, and we were talking about individual buildings. We were talking about the people that lived there. Actually, you can't see it at this particular zoom, but I've got chickens on the ground. I've got a cat stalking the chickens. I've got a boat that's outside, of a house. But then we were like, so where is the tanner going to be? The tanner's going to be on the opposite side of the river. And we draw in the horrible water that the tanner has created because no one wants to live near him and because of the smells and everything. And there was an entire story that evolved out of this. And that's one thing I like to pour into my maps. And I think adventurous would be a way of describing it. Not only do I adventure with my style, but I am literally adventuring in my own maps when I draw them. And if I can't do that, honestly, it's not an assignment that I want to do. I want to be able to feel like people actually live here. Like this is a real place. Not in the sense of what Anna does, and she and I love each other. We're basically, pseudo sisters. I do it from a person point of view. Anna is flying above the world at 60,000 feet, which is freaking amazing. But I'm down there with the people, hating on the tanner because he creates horrible water, and
Yeah.
that's what I pour that into every map.
Yeah, I can see that. Something that comes to my mind that I can see without you actually have done it is a water tower. Like the ones that they were made at the, I think, 1800s, or they're on wooden stilts and they're up on a hillside. I don't know why, but that just kind of rings a bell with me. Like you need to include a water tower at some point. I don't know how it would fit in with your worlds or even your cities, but a water tower just kind of comes to mind.
No, exactly, and it's all about that. Honestly, I sat there on the stream, and we don't have the city map here with us today, but I sat on a stream once drawing a big city. It was a metropolis, and you're drawing big, and I think most artists would stay big with that, but I don't. I'm down into a particular neighborhood and a building one day, and this building was on the side of a hill, and I'm asking myself the question, how do people get down to the street below? And so I end up drawing a little tiny path going down. And for me, it's all of those little details. Because if you've got those, now you have a place that feels real. Now you have stories. And drawing a little water tower or a tree inside a courtyard, it can be now things are real. Now there's a little pulse of heartbeat, inside your city, and that's what it's all about. For me, if you're drawing at any place where people live and it's just a series of rectangles, that's fine. I mean, that's honestly fine, but it's a functional map at that point, which is cold and lifeless. It's basically a mall map. It serves a purpose. I'm not going to knock it for serving a purpose, and we've all seen them in various products. But I don't do that. I want you to open a map and immediately see the little path of individuals or the water tower serving the water. I've got water towers, I've got aqueducts, and that's what it's all about. How did these people get water? Let's draw it. Let's get it on there. Because the minute you do that, now you've got all these little hundreds of little sims scurrying about your map, and now it takes on an extra dimension. There was a guest before me, and she had that 3D dimension, and it was wonderful. I like to try and do the human dimension of people actually walking about this stuff, and players and GMs alike seeing it right there. So yeah, that's what I like to do.
Well, I think that when I saw that map and I'm looking at this, I can almost see you doing this like a storyboard for like a movie. Like storyboards are a little bit more rough. They don't have as much detail, but I think if you took these and made it like a storyboard, like side by side in a row, I think that person would start with one of your elements, like a tower or something, and then go from that, like they were put there, and then they're walking to different parts of the city or the area, and it kind of would play out like a storyboard, in a sense. And it doesn't have to be in any particular order, but I think if it was put in, from left to right or right to left, even up to down, those sort of things, I think that would tell that story better for me anyways. Because if you made, like, let's say you decided to make the sewers underneath the city, I would place that storyboard underneath the city, so when you look at that as a whole, like a slideshow kind of thing, you would stop for a moment and look down and you would see the sewers. That's kind of the feeling I get from these pictures, the castle guide.
And I'm glad, and I really appreciate your insight. I truly do. It's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the type of thing that I shoot for in my maps. It's almost like I want to try and put down in pictorial format an experience. You know, I want you to, I want you to be able to actually look at one of my maps and say, so what about the sewer system under this thing? It's like the minute that you're curious, the minute as a player you're now wanting to explore, that right there is a victory to me. If you don't want to explore one of my maps, I feel like I failed. I want the GM and the players alike to look at one of my maps and just want to get in there, whether it be the sewers or the rooftops. I want you to be walking around in these maps, exploring it. That's kind of what I shoot for.
Well, this is beautiful work. I'm really impressed, and to be honest with you, I wasn't sure what how this was going to play out, but I'm really appreciating the conversation. I'm really liking it. So, what do you have any technical challenges other than time and such to create your products here? I mean, do you have things that
Yeah, I
bug
have
you?
about as much talent as a household brick. Honestly, one of our guests earlier on mentioned having like a creative background. I don't. I did art class, sure, we all do. In fact, my college degree is in graphic communications, but it was way less graphic and way more just practical, whatever. I don't have color theory. I'm actually, even when I'm painting my miniatures, it's one of my weakest areas. So for me, probably my biggest challenge is anytime I'm getting more and more artistic. I can't draw a face. In fact, there was a guest earlier on who said, "No, no, I like drawing faces on my, tokens because that's easier." And I'm sitting there saying, "I can't even draw a freaking apple, man. What are you talking about?" Um, like traditional artwork, I'm weak. Color theory, I'm weak. The more we get into that realm, the more I want to fight and escape and get out of the room. So with the project that we're looking at on the screen right now, I'm Twitch streaming this thing and I'm drawing it. And that's one thing, by the way, to streaming that is the best ever, because you'll find that your guests encourage you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And even if you thought about it in your head, you'd go, "Oh hell no, I'm not gonna do that." And I had a guest in my Twitch stream suggest that I draw a block tower. In fact, let me just rewind a little bit. The assignment was draw a tower as a map from above. Well, if I draw a tower from above in my style, my normal style, that's a pretty boring map, guys. That's a circle on a nicely painted canvas. Maybe with a little bit of drop shadow if you're lucky. And I had someone on Twitch say, draw block tower, and my reaction was, what the hell is a block tower? And then the other suggestion was, how about a cutaway view? And that's the power of drawing in, not, I don't want to say in front of a crowd, because I consider it a drawing with friends. I always position it as I'm sitting there drawing and I've got a whole bunch of friends in the room with me, and they're suggesting things as you go. They look over your shoulder, they say, "That's cool, why don't you do this?" And so for me, drawing a cutaway of a block tower, that was a challenge, because now you're asking me to actually get into artwork, and I don't want to do that, guys. I'm not very good at it. So for me, It is that challenge. It's always that little bar getting raised above my capabilities, all of the time. But I see it as a challenge. I see it as something to really try and attain. And the assignment on the left there actually had a whole bunch of that.
Yeah, so that was your kind of your opus there, in regards
In
to.
many ways, I mean, look, I drew that. I drew that block, and you can see the black and white version as I'm going, and it's
Yeah.
not particularly good. It's loose. That's the first time I'd ever done it. Um, but then it came to the Mott and Bailey Castle that's next to it. That's the middle near top, and I'm like, okay, so now I've actually drawn a cutaway, and I'm going to do a Mott and Bailey. What's a Mott and Bailey from above? Two circles surrounded by two more circles. I mean, it is. It's just basically a figure eight within a figure eight. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to draw this from a slightly different angle. And so that was the first time I'd ever drawn anything like that from that angle. And it's not the best in the world. We've got guests with us here today that would do a better job. But this was me actually going into new waters. And then the middle left, where we've got that castle in an almost semi-isometric sort of format, I was like, okay, shoot, if I'm going to draw a castle, let's try and make it a little bit more interesting than just from above. And so I kind of did this almost bird's eye view. It's not really isometric. And so that was the first time I'd ever drawn a castle in that type of way. So yeah, in many ways, this was I don't want to call it a magnus opus. I will do more like this, and I will get better and better as I go along. But I thought this was a great example of how drawing with friends can actually encourage you to go into uncomfortable areas where you don't want to go as an artist, and just do it. This definitely had a whole bunch of that for me.
Very interesting. I wasn't even aware of how involved you are with this. I mean, I didn't realize how. I mean, you're practically crawling on the streets. You're not just walking. You're crawling around the alleys. You're looking in corners. You're not just walking the streets. The streets are just your middle ground there. You're actually right there. Looking around the corner. So that's definitely an adventure trope there that you have. Bravo.
Thank you. Honestly, how I would describe myself and the types of commissions that I like to take on, okay. So a quick story about me, and I will keep it quick. Back when I was about 10 years of age, my school was part of an art competition for our local town. I actually grew up in a place called Chester, which is 2,000 years old, and it was founded by the Romans. I am a huge Romanophile, and I am a huge history nut, potentially because I was born in a place like that. Well, there's 2,000 years of history in Chester, and so when all of the schools are drawing an iconic piece of Chester, they're all doing the more modern things. We have an incredible Victorian clock. Everyone was drawing that, but not me. Not old Alyssa Faden. I went back to the amphitheater that we have there, but I didn't draw it as ruins. I was like, I'm going to draw it like the Romans were seeing it. So I just did this big, huge amphitheater with like gladiators fighting. I was probably a little bit disturbed as a kid. Had thousands and thousands and thousands of people watching. I drew them all in pencil first, and then I went over with ink work afterwards. And it had that type of insane detail and labor of love that I think has become part of what I do now. I want my maps to have so many ink strokes on them. What someone looks at them and goes, is she okay in the head? Or is she a little bit lost? And that's I think every single one I do has to have detail, hand drawn detail in it, where you kind of start to worry about my mental health. That's kind of my style now.
Well, growing up there, I mean, you have all that architecture that's like Tudor mixed in with the wood and the stone, and then you got that Roman thing going on. So It does
Here again,
show.
the silence. Again, the tough crowd. Who go,
Oh yes.
ooh,
So what I'm saying
ooh.
is that you're growing up as a girl in the in that town of Chester. You have that Tudor style buildings, and then you have the Roman architecture built in. So I can see that now, looking at your maps, that you definitely still have a memory of those times when you were in Chester. Um, it shows, and I don't think you've seen a castle, but you have seen a fortress. You've seen some Roman structure. So
Oh,
you've
my
definitely.
friend. No, I'm European. I'm like Anna. Come on, Anna and I
Yes.
are spoiled in so many ways. I have LARPed in a castle. I
Hmm.
have slept in a castle. I mean, castles are just they're 10 a penny in bloody England. We hardly pay them any attention. There's castles everywhere. But we also have that wonderful sense of the evolutionary growth of settlement as Europeans. We get to see how a settlement was founded, what the motivations were, how it grew from there, why, in what direction. And I think that it certainly influences my work. And I know on a grander scale, it influences Anna. I mean, Anna is a goddess. She looks down on the world. She is drawing rivers and shaping mountains and moving tectonic plates. I'm the same on a settlement level. I want to know why the settlement was settled here. I want to know where that first building was put down. And I want to know what the motivation was for people to come here after that and how the settlement grew from beyond it. And I think that's one of the things I can bring to the table as a cartographer because my maps then look plausible. Even if you look at one of my metropolises, metropoli, I don't know. If you look at one of these huge settlements, you get this sense of, oh, this thing has been here for hundreds of years. These guys plopped down here, they grew out here. I understand why a marketplace is over there. And so I think my European roots, and certainly being in a city that's 2,000 years old, I think that has helped me. While I have no artistic formal training, it has helped me breathe plausibility into my maps.
Yes, I agree. So it's hard to draw or write about something that you haven't experienced. And that, even with all the training in the world, it's not going to give you that life experience that you need to express and have this natural kind of feel for it. So yeah, I get it. It's yeah, that's really cool. So we could talk about some other maps if you'd like. um,
Well, I think we have. Don't we have my Gaslight map? I don't want to take us too long here, but I
yeah, no
think I
problem.
didn't I send you my Gaslight map?
Yeah, I want to look at that.
Yeah. So this is going to be a very different style now. And we could just then. Well, so this is Gaxmore, and we can. So the Gaxmore one was fine. We'll come back to it at a future show. So this one that we've got on the screen here. So no, let's hit the Gaslight one. So
Yep.
Gaslight is a current assignment of mine. It is ongoing. It will be wrapping here in the next couple of months. But here is a beautiful example of a very different style. The assignment was from Chaosium. They asked me to draw London as it was in 1890. This starts to tickle all of the little buttons that I have for researching historical things. This is obviously a real world place, the Doi, but we're talking about a real world time period. We're not talking fantasy now. And so I actually ended up going to the University of London, the University of Edinburgh, even we've got the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress, by the way, is a fantastic resource. I dug up a whole bunch of period maps for London. And from those, I started to gain inspiration for actually how they drew things back then, how they started to think about things back then, how they presented them on paper. The grid, there's some circles in there too. The scale, by the way, is like, I think the scale, if I recall correctly, is half-mile squares and circles. And it was such a delicious phrase. It's like, what scales do that? I'm like, I'm doing that. I am doing that scale on this map. So I have half-mile squares and circles. I took inspiration from how they did their borders. Some of them were a lot more flowery, but then it would be less practical for real world purposes. And it was looking at maps from the period for every single building of 1890 London. Everyone. I have the underground, I have the rail system, I have the canal system, I have every single street and alley, every single building, church, public courthouse, you name it, graveyard, it is on here. And this, if you talk about Magnus Opus, this is one of them. And this is going to shape a lot of what I do here in the next couple of years. Because this right here tapped into something I love doing. Historical research and trying to match styles from people 100 or 200 years ago to invoke this sense of a map from many, many years prior. This was a great challenge, and I love how this thing turned out.
Well, I might be hitting you up someday for a smaller map in Chingford Hatch, because that's where my grandmother's from. So I'd love to see
Oh,
that.
that's fantastic.
I'd love to see that, with your eyes, but maybe not such a grand scale, but in that neighborhood. That's like northeast London, I believe. So yeah, I would love to see that.
I've done a few like this. There was an assignment given to me many, many years ago where they basically gave me Google Maps of a real world location and said, we want you to draw that. And even back then, something got tickled in the back of my brain where I was like, I actually really enjoyed this experience. And then there was a map that I did, Dubrovnik, which of course was one of the locations in Game of Thrones. I drew it before Game of Thrones because Dubrovnik is a freaking awesome location in the world. And I drew it. But I was looking at it on Google Maps, like drawing it ink on paper type of thing. And I love that aspect of looking at a real world location and kind of doing a version of it, let's say medieval times or whatever. I'm gonna do more of this right here. I'm gonna draw Shanghai. I'm gonna draw New York. I'm gonna draw, maybe Paris, but all in their 1890s or 1920s version. Those older versions that could easily slot into a Call of Cthulhu game. I'm gonna do way more of this.
Yeah, Vampire too. They'll be hitting you up as well.
There you go, vampire. they're beautiful, exactly. This map, by the way, I'm drawing 90 inches across. It is freaking huge. It's going to be a poster. It's the client Chaosium asked me to draw this. They weren't thinking poster, but you know me at this point in our conversation. If you could ask me to draw a map, I'm going to go nuts. I am going to go full out nuts.
You did.
And I did. And then I came back to them and said, you might want to do a poster of this. And they were like, we're going to do a poster of this. And that's what I'm all about. I want to create things you could print out big and put on your wall and be happy with it there. That's what I like doing.
So you get all the bloody bridges and everything else. That's great.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So I don't want to cut this short. I want to talk to you more actually after the show. But so what advice can you give us? For people that are still kind of new, or people that need to diversify, or even the research that you discussed. I mean, what do you suggest? Like, live life a little and then draw, or that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. But that's just me. But
no, well, honestly, it's a little bit of like all of the above. A few guests have come up with some great answers, and I want to honestly say there is no one right path. You do a little bit of everything. The traditional artists out there, of course, have got their heads up or an advantage when it comes to the stability of their hand or understanding color combinations of things. And believe me, I'm jealous of those people too. While on the other hand, you've got people from Europe or various other places who have got the advantage of walking around a world castle, etc. Don't let any of that discourage you. Honestly, none of that is important from making or breaking you being able to draw your own maps. This is a wonderful world of technology right now where information is at your fingertips. You can look up color theory. You can look up various artistic techniques or how to use GIMP or Photoshop or whatever. So don't let the fact that you don't know that discourage you. I started with ink on paper, the most primitive of tools when it comes to this. And you can see in front of you the types of things that I'm doing now. And I literally just drew. I just drew. And you can as well. And if I am to say anything to you, if you have an interest in mapping at all, it's like, don't be intimidated by what other people are doing. And I get it because I am intimidated. Even 30, 40 years on, I'm intimidated to this day. But don't be. You will create your own style. You will do your own work. Pick up that pencil, pick up that virtual pencil, and just do it. The third thing I would say to you is don't be shy of looking at what other people are doing. I am highly influenced on some of my maps by Mike Schley. He does the Watsy stuff right now. He is a true artist. I have spoke to him briefly on a couple of occasions, and there's some of my earlier work that has a lot of his influence in there, and that's okay. Pick up things that you like from people and places in real life and be inspired by them. It's like you will become your own jigsaw puzzle. Pull out pieces from all around you, your own experiences, your own things that you're seeing in life, whether it be other people's work or real world places. Pull them in, pull them into your own toolbox, and just make them part of your tools moving forwards. And you will create your own style. You will create your own work. And honestly, show them in front of me, and I'm always going to be thrilled because you are now drawing maps, and that's what it's all about. Just do it. I feel like Shia LaBeouf. Just do it.
I can see this going from like you're saying Chaosium, video games, all the way to like Ancestry.com. I could see you making maps for people who want to reconnect with their past, and that's kind of why I mentioned the thing with my grandmother, because it is something that's like it's hard to get a hold of those maps. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but to have a poster of where your relatives used to live in this type of style it would sell. I'm sorry, it just would. You're not going to sell a bunch of them, but you can charge a buttload of money for it. And I guarantee if you make a poster like this for someone that has the desire to reconnect with their past, I think that would work.
I think no, I think you and it becomes a personal thing then, right? It becomes real.
Yes.
Like you've got an emotional attachment to it then. And I think that's one reason why I'm enjoying this Chaosium project so much. It's almost like a little time machine. And
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. And if you got a little time machine to relatives, well, that becomes
Yeah.
special. And that becomes something else altogether then.
And then this would work with like Savage Worlds, Rippers, and oh, this just endless.
Well,
So
thank you.
yeah, so gee whiz, I think we need to take a short break. So Alyssa, thank you very much for coming